All right, we'll get started for everybody that's here on time, both here in Seattle and remotely. And so I'm David Eaton. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at Seattle Children's Autism Center, and I'm stepping in for Jim Mancini this month, as well as actually next month as well. So next month we have Travis Nelson, one of the dentists at Seattle Children's, working over at the Center for Pediatric Dentistry, so that'll be a great talk. But tonight we have Ben Wahl and Raffael Boccamazzo. Thank you. And they're both here tonight to talk about video games, dating, homework, oh my. So talking about teens and tweens, that age group, and some of the social skills opportunities and whatnot. So first of all, just a little brief introduction. Ben Wahl here in the light shirt. He is the founder and director of the Aspiring Youth Program. This serves clients through social skills groups, summer programs, individual services, and young adult services as well. Ben is proud to facilitate 5 groups per week, and he's also out in the field with summer campers for 10 weeks every summer. He's been doing that for a number of years. He received his bachelor's degree from Wesleyan University and his social work master's degree from the University of Washington. And then as well tonight, Raffael Boccamazzo, Dr. Boccamazzo has spent the last 5 years working with a variety of clients in a variety of settings. In addition to facilitating groups through the Aspiring Youth Program with Ben, Dr. Boccamazzo has 2 private practice locations that serve adolescent and adult clients in Bellevue as well as West Seattle. In addition to his psychological pursuits, he also enjoys acting and cooking, both of which he's been doing since childhood. And he's, of course, in this dark jacket here. So Dr. Boccamazzo and Ben, and we'll get going with that. Oh, actually, first of all, 2 more things for the external sites that are logged in already. Make sure you're muting your microphones as you're logging in here, and then you can unmute your microphones as you have questions. Particularly at the end, we'll have some time for questions. And then also just keep in mind this is being videotaped, not videotaped, we don't have those anymore, but it's being recorded. And this will be eventually put up on YouTube, so try and refrain from providing any protected health information about yourself or your child that you would not want on YouTube. Just keep that in mind. All right, thanks a lot, and let's welcome Ben and Raffael.
Thanks. So there's an excellent introduction. I better put this on. And just, good? I will stay near the podium so the camera doesn't get confused. So I'm really lucky to be joined by Raffael. He runs some great groups for us, and then he also does some groups for the young adult program at the Elizabeth Burnett Center. And that, Aspiring Youth, we're really proud that Children's came to us to help with those groups. Aspiring Youth is part of Ryther. We're a local nonprofit. We're going to be talking about our experiences with these awesome kids and teens. And for the last 10 years, we've done these groups. We've worked with them individually. We've been out building trails and habitat restoration in the summers. And they're remarkable folks. I've learned a lot from them. And I would love to say that 10 years ago, I kind of targeted the population and did a scope and a survey and figured out exactly what it was. But they kind of came to us. And I've learned a lot over the years from them. And so some of the things we're going to talk about tonight, I think, are going to feel pretty familiar to you. I mean, what Raffael and I are able to do is reflect back and kind of see some of the trends, some of the common themes that parents and teenagers are coming to us with. The reason we've kind of selected video games, dating, and homework is that we want to narrow the focus a little. We don't want it to be, this is adolescence, as though it's some big broad thing, and the teen brain, and all of that. We'd like to really hone in on some of the day-to-day things that these young folks are encountering, and sort of speak to that. We're going to talk a bit about the identity that's built. If we're going to talk about adolescence, we better talk about identity. We're going to talk about executive functioning. And again, we're going to use these 3 areas as kind of touchstones and frame of reference. So I'm going to be talking about identity a little first, and then Raffael's going to touch base on executive functioning, and then we're going to dive into dating and video games and all that fun stuff. Just kind of curious, how many folks in the room are parents? Folks are great. And providers, do we have some providers? 1 or 2? You folks are okay too, you're welcome to. But the parents are the experts. Folks, you know this stuff, and we're going to have a lot of great interactive conversation, and I think it's wonderful if when we're doing that, share your strategies, okay? And what Raffael and I hope to do is just kind of open the conversation, reflect back a little of what we're seeing when we're talking to families, when we're talking to these teenagers in the groups. And yeah, doing 5 groups a week, I'm living with them sometimes, it feels like. I'm in the trenches, so to speak, and I really embrace that. I would not have a lot of fun sitting behind the computer and administrating. That's just not my approach. So here's some of our folks. They're on the challenge course here, and it's staged. It's a photo shoot. So they're not always that sort of chipper, but these are really wonderful folks, and some of the folks have really been with us for like 5 or 6 years in our program. So these are the topics we're going to touch base on, and some of our goals for tonight. I want to start, we're going to talk around identity. I think, we went away from Asperger's syndrome with, autism spectrum disorder level 1. It's actually 3 really good sentences there. We're talking inflexibility, difficulty switching, problems of organization and planning. And a lot of very smart people spend a lot of time working on the DSM-5. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all, but I do think it's a really good frame of reference and a way to start thinking about some of the things that affect folks, whether they are ASD level 1 or ASD level 2 or 3, or even if they're having similar traits but not on the spectrum. Autism adjacent is a term that one of my facilitators uses. I think it's pretty spot on. These are our folks. This is after they did some trail building and habitat restoration on Snoqualmie Pass. It's Alaska Peak in the background and Cold Creek Pond. And just phenomenal bunch of students. I mean, I think that's the definition. And while their neurotypical peers were down in the valley playing Xbox, they were up here doing something pretty awesome. This same group of students actually got the Seattle Parks Award for Service, the Denny Award. They're awarded that at Mohi Museum. This is 2013. And just phenomenal group of kids. Every year, phenomenal. But I look at them and I see a big group of teenagers, and that's what we want to see. Okay? And the next slide took me a while to think about. I don't know quite how to frame this. They're going through the same process through adolescence, but it's also different, and some of that is around how they're communicating their process. But the presumption that there's an adolescence for neurotypicals and an adolescence for spectrum folks, I think, is a really false assumption. They're going through the same stuff, but it does look different at the same time as well. It would be incomplete for us to say, oh yeah, it's all the same, or kind of a broad approach to it. It is different to a degree, but they also have the same desires and interests and development. Perhaps they're expressing it a little differently, or it might look a little different. But I hope that what we talk about tonight strikes you not just for your child who's on the spectrum, but maybe his sibling or a cousin or other folks that young folks that you're around, because I do think it applies throughout the board. Because their process is their process is the same, but they're communicating about it differently, or they're approaching adolescence just slightly different, or things that come up for them don't quite come up in the same way for their peers. Because of that, we've got to define the identity. And I don't think defining by I'm autism spectrum level 1 with the comorbidity of ADHD, that's not really catchy, okay? But there's some terms that have come across through these young folks over the years, ways that they've self-described themselves, which I think are really important. And again, if we're going to talk adolescence, I think identity has a place in that conversation, a pretty important place. Each family is going to have their own authentic way to talk about this, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion. And again, I've heard kids describe themselves as quirky, unique learner, Aspie, that's kind of old standby. Even though it's not an official diagnosis anymore, we still hear it. I think that's cool. Neurodiversity. And also there is a really neat TED Talk out there called Quiet, it's the Power of Introverts. And Susan Cain, it's like one of the top TED Talks of all time. Even though it's not about autism, I think it's really valid because what she does in her talk is sort of challenge this social norm or this assumption that being extroverted, being socially at ease is kind of the only valuable thing. And she sort of says, no, folks who might sit back a little in social settings have a lot to add and are going to process differently. She challenges the way we set up our workspaces, the way we kind of put value on speaking up and kind of asserting your communication, that she's saying there's a lot of validity to the person who sits back and wants to contemplate and processes in a quieter way. So I've seen that some of my kids have really gained some value from seeing that video on YouTube. Very easy to find. I'm going to turn it over to Raffael here. He's going to talk a little about, we've talked about identity, but now kind of how young folks can think about executive functioning.
Yeah, so, one of the major points that I run into in terms of meeting with educators, parents, and just anybody who's interacting with kids who are, my kids love using the word Aspies to self-identify, so I'm probably going to throw that one out there from time to time. But just as a point of question for anybody here in the audience, do you know what single quality has been most associated with intelligence since, for the last 150 years or so, since a bunch of old white guys in France decided what intelligence was? Any ideas? The ability, yes.
Reflection?
No. No. Any other thoughts? Words. The ability to articulate, remember, and string words together. Think about that. If you find someone who can't speak in a clear and concise manner, you know something's up. But when you find somebody who can talk articulately, clearly, and remembers words really easily, a lot of people have a hard time noticing what other deficits may or may not be there. And the problem with high-functioning autism spectrum disorders is they're so diverse in how they present. So what we're going to talk about are some of these executive functioning deficits. One being impulse control. I'm sure all you parents have seen that one. I mean, it's a little bit beyond normal childhood development when you've got a 14-year-old who just can't stop buying the premium material on that video game app that's on the iPad because they just can't delay that gratification of earning the premium material the hard way. They got to get it now, 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 now. And I've seen credit card bills running in the thousands because of that. Emotional control, they just get dysregulated, partially because they have a hard time frequently identifying their own emotions. I mean, there's that frontal lobe stuff right there. You know, the stuff that's not fully developed in neurotypical teenagers, but it's a little underdeveloped in folks on the autism spectrum. Planning and prioritizing, this is another one. The kids I work with, we lovingly refer to this as one of two things. This is the combination of the distractibility and the planning and prioritizing thing. We refer to this as the ooh shiny factor, or squirrels. And all of the kids, they instantly identify with that when the squirrels are out. Just, whoop. I'm sorry, what? I'm sure you've all seen that.
That's from the movie Up, right?
That is definitely from the movie Up. If you haven't seen it, just be prepared to cry.
Yeah.
But flexibility is another one, and we're going to be talking about that a lot more when we get into video games and socializing, but getting locked into one activity, one concept, one pattern, and that, what we see in the kids we work with, both in Aspiring Youth and in my private practice, is part of the reasons video games are so appealing to this crowd. And getting them kind of out of that is so helpful. Working memory. What this basically means is storing bits of information. If I were to, if one of you were to direct me to walk over to the door, not only do I have to listen to you, receive that auditory information, decode that auditory information, understand it by, through the decoding process, move my body at the same time, follow your directions as I'm moving my body, notice where I'm going, and then open the door. That's multiple bits of information that most of us take for granted. And when you got someone who can only store one or two things at a time, following directions, huge challenge. Self-monitoring, same thing. A lot of information taking in, and especially when there's no emotional vocabulary there. The example I like to use is, how do you explain blue to somebody who's never seen a thing in their life? How do you explain sadness to somebody who really can't identify it in themselves? And that becomes kind of the challenge in working with these folks. And I'm going to turn it back to Ben, who's going to talk about dating.
Dating.
All
time.
right,
Okay.
dating.
So we're going to talk about dating and then video games. And we're saving the boring stuff with homework till the end, probably rush through that. We definitely want to leave a full half hour for conversation and discussion and your input. And again, when we talk about identity, sometimes the issues that occur around executive functioning can become the identity. And we have to be really careful about that. And it makes me very sad in a group when a kid says, I'm not good at math, right? Or, around those areas, they're identifying with the deficit, and that's really unfair for them. And unfortunately, I think sometimes as providers, we back that up. I mean, if you've heard your child defined based on which classroom they're in at school, that's kind of baloney. I disagree when I hear people saying, oh, he's an EBD kid or he's a contained classroom kid. That's how the schools need to define it, maybe for administrative reasons, but it shouldn't be the person's identity. So again, going back to that slide on identity, whether neurodiverse, whether Aspie, whether, loving animals, whether, whatever it is that defines the person, we need to look at that. And the more strong identity they can have around that, hey, I processed information in a pretty cool way, or I really know history well, or geography, or I'm really well able to connect with animals well. The more they're able to define that as they move through adolescence, the easier it is to work on these executive functioning issues, okay? And it frees them up to sort of say, I'm good with myself, I'm progressing through adolescence, I'm good over here, and I've got the confidence then to put the energy towards these executive functioning issues. I've put in the reference slide, it's like a Learning Disability Association put it out. It's also on the blog, and maybe we can post to it, but it's a really good handbook, and it's on executive function. It really has some nice cartoon images as well, but we had a link to it on the blog we did this week, so if you go on the Autism blog, it's on there. But we've shown some of our adolescents that, and they really appreciate it, because rather than saying, I have autism, therefore I have to work on these issues, it sort of says, I'm an awesome adolescent, I'm moving through my adolescent, and oh yes, of these 6 issues, I'm really good at impulse control, but I have difficulty with flexibility. I'm really good at emotional control, I'm a pretty even-keeled guy, but when it comes to working memory, meaning remembering my backpack or remembering facts about another kid in my class who I want to be friends with, that's harder for me. So it gives them a more concise way to target those areas, okay? And it helps them see that autism itself is a form of identity and part of who that person might be, and that everyone, whether on the spectrum or neurotypical, has some work to do on executive functioning. I will raise my hand high and say that planning and prioritization is mine. I got here on time today, so that's good. But we've all got to do that work, and I think it normalizes and sort of says this is something that we work on. Adolescents probably have a little more to do on executive functioning areas than adults, just because they've got a little less experience. But again, normalizing that process and making it okay to work on these sometimes hard areas. Again, differentiating identity from areas of challenge or areas that they need to work on. Okay, so we're going to use a frame of reference now, which is around dating. This is a helpful way to talk about social. I spend a lot of time talking about social skills and running social skills groups. Dating is something that comes up for a lot of our adolescents. And the first thing I'd want to do is challenge the assumption that folks on the autism spectrum aren't interested in dating or aren't attracted. As Raffael referenced, just because they're not communicating about it doesn't mean they're not interested about it. Okay? And I think a lot of the researchers in the field have sort of shown it requires parents to be a little more proactive about it. There are a lot, I think, to my teenage years, I didn't want my parents to talk to me about it too much. But I also had a peer cohort to bounce ideas off of, and some of our folks don't necessarily have that, and we have to be aware of that. Second, we need to acknowledge dating is about social. And for some of our folks, they're seeing it as a path, as I say here, towards normalcy and independence. And anecdotally, we've seen a few adolescents who maybe have had challenges with the general social milieu, making friends at school, joining a high school after-school club. Some of those things have presented challenges, whether due to anxiety or sensory issues or just fatigue. It's hard to join the robotics club. Even if robotics is something you really love, sometimes it's hard to do that if it's at 4 p.m. in the afternoon and you're kind of tired already. So there's sometimes the phenomenon of sort of saying, well, I haven't had much luck socially, but I'm just going to skip to dating. And that's the way I can kind of catch up. That's a term that I've heard sometimes. So we just need to acknowledge that. We don't want to say, well, don't date. But by the same token, we want to help guide folks to understand that it's a whole social process. It's not just sort of saying, well, I'm not socializing here, so I'm going to focus on dating. That's my way to kind of normalize or catch up or prove that I'm independent. So this is from the show Freaks and Geeks. It's on Netflix. I put this up here because it speaks to that there's social hierarchy in high schools, and not always great. Nice thing about this show is that the boy did get the girl in this and sort of disrupted that social hierarchy. But folks we work with are probably more aware about social hierarchy than they might be communicating. And it's not fair, it's unfortunate, but a reality that they are facing. And representation culturally is Mozart and the Whale. This is another good movie. And sometimes, you might, as a parent, want to view the movie first, but I think what's neat, it shows two folks on the spectrum who are dating. It's another movie called Adam, and wherein the male is on the spectrum and the female is not. And lastly, kind of a neat book that we've seen recently. This is about a husband who's kind of building his emotional quotient, so to speak, and kind of learning some of the social reciprocity with his wife. And it's written by David Finch, who has Asperger's syndrome. So again, those are just some neat kind of cultural touchstones. And what's cool is maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there was, we wouldn't have seen movies like that or books like that out. So I think that is a neat step forward and one that we need to continue as parents and providers. So dating is a good way to look at social. So first of all, there's the social nuance. It's sort of understanding, do I try to start dating with someone I know well or someone I don't know well? That's a social nuance. Understanding kind of who I might fit with. Does this person have similar interests to me? That's kind of social radar. And conversation initiation. Obviously, if it's an individual who has a hard time striking up a conversation, aspects of dating can be quite difficult. And lastly, perspective taking. This is something that Michelle Garcia-Winter, who's a speech and language pathologist, really touches on a lot. Her term is social thinking, but kind of trying to extrapolate what the other person, in this case the prospective partner, might feel. And when I've talked to some individual clients, they talk about friends in a way of kind of getting a friend. So if I do really well at the math contest, I will get a lot of friends, or I'm going to impress people and get friends through it. Or if I'm good at this, I'm going to get friends. And that's not how it works, really. You have to develop friendships, and you have to listen. And kind of what we know is that if the other person feels very valued by you and you're interested in them and you're asking questions about them, they're more likely to become your friend. And the same is true around dating. And in the same way, I think sometimes the way my clients talk about dating, it's as though they want to get a boyfriend or get a girlfriend. And obviously the prospective partner is going to feel a little bit not great about that, okay? So a little bit like the person's trying too hard. And so these are some social skills that can really be talked about. I think our clients deserve a direct approach. It's really hard to say to your son or daughter. It's hard for me to say to my clients in an individual session, back off or take a slower approach. But that can be very helpful and instructive because they may not realize that taking a very hard driving or forward approach might make dating a hard process for them. So again, we talked about executive functioning. I'm not going to go too far into that. I think Raffael covered it well. What I would want to point to is that if the young person is putting a lot of energy towards these other areas just to get through the school day, it makes the dating part harder. Meaning, if they're trying really hard just to remember their homework assignment, or they're very frustrated by the sensory or the sound issues at a cafeteria, it's harder to strike up a nice, relaxed conversation and initiate dating conversation, or kind of talking to someone that they're interested in. So what I mean to get to with this slide is that if there are other areas of their life, whether it's around homework, whether it's around sensory challenges, I think that's an area where occupational therapists play a really important role. If we can ease some of those other challenges, it can be easier for that conversation to occur and for dating to kind of move forward. So some very concrete strategies for these folks. And whether you talk to your child's therapist about this or you talk to your child directly, again, I think our folks that I work with and that your kids, they appreciate a straightforward approach. And sometimes just saying, listen, slow down before you get to the dating part, maybe practicing some more hangout with peers and friends, maybe joining a school club. And obviously, I think for anyone, when they're first trying dating, communicating to someone they're interested in a group setting can be a little easier. It can also put the other person at ease rather than kind of a lot of one-on-one interaction. Everyone's kind of in a group milieu. They're getting to know each other around other folks, and I think it makes it a little more relaxed and a little more informal. So I think joining groups is great, not just around dating, but around building friendships and confidence socially. I think we have to touch on hygiene. I think I just mentioned occupational therapists. I'll mention it again. They're great. And for some reason, I'm not an occupational therapist. We don't do it in our program, but there are great OTs in the field here. For some reason, I think a lot of times OTs are used for elementary school kids, and it's phased out as folks get to middle school and high school. I think that's unfortunate. And the reason is that teenagers that I work with, they're not showering because they're against it or they think it's stupid. Now, they may say that because they're embarrassed to say, water makes me uncomfortable, or I don't like the feel of a shower, okay? But for a teenager, it's a lot easier to say showering's stupid, or I don't believe in it, or oh, it's just, you know, it's lame, okay? Than to say, I don't know quite how to handle the sensory issues around that. I might need a little help with that, okay? But around kind of hygiene, showering, around kind of appropriate clothes. Once again, I don't think my clients are wearing some of the more, well, athletic shorts and t-shirt. That's kind of the uniform for some of my clients. And I think that other clothes are uncomfortable for them, and that's why they might not be doing that. But the problem is that adolescence, you're growing into a new body, and athletic shorts might not be the way to go. A lot of my staff do work with clients on, if you are going to wear athletic shorts, how are you going to sit? What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? Okay, because that hygiene thing, let's just, you know, that can be a real, right there, if it's not going well, that can stop the process right off the bat, okay? So whether it's an occupational therapist who's able to do that, whether it's the child's counselor that they see, whether it's a parent, working on that can be really helpful. And working to improve listening skills and practice and role play. This is an area where I think the clients I work with really benefit if they are interested in dating and kind of talking to someone they have attraction to, going through that conversation, again, either with the trusted adult, a professional, or the parent. And we might avoid that, okay? And as a parent, I can say, I'm not sure how I'd enter into that conversation with my child. Well, she's not an adolescent yet. So, but at some point, we may be having that conversation. It's not always the easiest one to start with. But again, I think it can be instructive to walk through some of the conversation, whether it's around how to initiate the dating, whether it's around strategies, etc. So practice and role play has a place. I want to speak briefly on boundaries around dating. There's a lot of hidden rules, like you ask out someone who you know and they know you. But that's not posted on the school wall, right? It's something about pride, excellence, cougar pride. You know, I mean, if you look at a high school, they're not going to say hidden rules of dating, okay? And our folks aren't always able to kind of read between the lines and decode. Wouldn't that be awesome if they had a sign, here's the good rules for dating? And it was much more concrete. But it's not. And it is, just like a lot of social aspects, there's unwritten rules. And so things like familiarity, things like age. It isn't written anywhere that if you're 17, asking a 14-year-old out, it's not great. Well, this 14-year-old's a freshman at your school. They go to your same school. Where is it officially said that that's not great? Well, it's not great. It's just an unwritten rule, and there's some very obvious reasons about it. A 14-year-old and a 17-year-old are different developmentally, but our folks might not understand that. So setting some clear boundaries can be helpful. We've done a lot of work with this around this with our young adults. If an individual's 18 or 19, they might be going to community college with the person who's 28 or 29. That's a really big age gap, and that can be problematic. So kind of helping them understand some of the boundaries around that. So appropriate use of cell phones. More is not always better. And I think some of our folks, again, they don't see that unwritten rule of if you try too hard, it's not seen as cool. But if you're a very logical person, texting 20 times might achieve better results than texting once or twice. I mean, you're increasing your odds each time, right? And this is something that we've explicitly gone through with our clients, okay? Again, it's an unwritten rule. When the child gets the cell phone or gets on Facebook or whatever, there's no disclaimer there of like, if you want better success on Facebook, please use sparingly. But it really is the truth. And so, you know, something to keep in mind. Also, not just quantity, but type of conversation. One thing that we've seen a lot in dating situations is that our clients will overshare. They'll bring things to the texting or the conversation table that really should stay with the therapist. And maybe that's big emotionality. Maybe it's thoughts of sadness or anxiety or whatever. I'm a social worker, so I'm always looking at context, and I do feel that some of it might be like the MTV soap opera type things they have. Because if you just watch that, if that's your view of what dating is supposed to be like, if you're watching The Hills and you think that's what dating is supposed to be like, you would believe that dating can't happen in just like, hey, how was your day? How's it going? There's got to be big flare-ups and, oh, gossip and all those things. And unfortunately, that's a TV show. And in real life, if you're oversharing and saying, I'm really, really sad today, that might not be the level of intimacy of someone who's 15 who you're starting to date. It's kind of good to keep things more informal. And again, that's an unwritten rule. And relationship intimacy is going to happen as the person grows. But I think, you know, if we're first encountering dating, it's not the time to kind of share your soul, so to speak. So having some boundaries on what you share and what you don't share. And lastly, you know, mutual understanding about intimacy. Lastly, awareness that relationships end. For some of the folks I work with, maybe they've had bullying experiences early on, or they had some sense of isolation through middle school and high school years. So if dating does come up, we run a summer camp with 40 or 50 teens every day, so dating does come up for us. And we have seen that in some instances, a little bit too much weight is put on it. All of a sudden, here's this really exciting new thing. It can kind of normalize the social situation for that young person. And also, I think even for parents, they might be pretty darn excited. I think that'd be natural, okay? But moderating expectations is a really good thing that you can do as a parent. You can sort of say, well, if you're starting to date at 15 or 16, there's a good chance you're not going to get married to this person. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But moderating those expectations can be a very helpful and healthy thing to do. Okay, a little more on boundaries. I'm going to skip through this. I do want to point out on the online realm, there's something called catfishing in which people are creating fake personas. And you know, we had a young adult girl who really did believe that she was dating a Disney actor. And his picture was on the online profile, and he said he lived in LA. A few years back, there was a Notre Dame football player who thought he was in a relationship. So if a college graduate can fall victim to this, our folks can as well. So moderating some of those expectations around online and being involved with that is important. These are things I didn't think about when I was in high school. I had like a landline. I think it was a rotary almost. But we have to be aware that sometimes online dating can feel very real, even if it's not. So these are around boundaries. Just to close, before we start talking about video games, I think I've covered this, but be open and proactive as parents. These folks a lot of our folks pick it up more and are aware of some of the dating and development of sexuality, and that's going around in their high schools, and they're picking up on it, but they might not be sure how to navigate it. So you really guiding it a little more directively than you might with a neurotypical peer makes some sense. And I think they appreciate that. And in looking at the literature and folks who are providers and have looked at autism and dating, they've really said be direct. And it can be hard to be the one to broach the subject, but I think a lot of these young folks really do appreciate that. Review boundaries. Again, sort of things that we would take for granted, age gap, degree of familiarity. If you can be proactive and review that, that's good. And again, as I'd mentioned, sort of role playing, discussing the specifics of asking someone out, helping them gain the written rules that they might be missing, because a lot of this is unwritten. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Raffael. And we are going to do questions at the end. So feel free to jot anything down you have around dating.
And please do. And before we move on to video games, because this actually kind of goes into the reason some of our guys play video games. And I'm going to use the term guys pretty deliberately, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but the ratio of people on the autism spectrum, male to female, is about 5 to 1. So odds are going to be guys. One thing I want to mention in terms of a resource for dating is a wonderful website named Dr. Nerdlove. It's a remarkably astute and well-written blog website of basically how to date and how to not be creepy. They emphasize that a lot. But in addition to that, with many folks on the autism spectrum, there is this sort of perfectionistic anxiety that leads to a paralysis of just any sort of attempts. So a lot of the folks we have who are trying to date, at least a lot of the young adults I've worked with, they not only fear rejection, but they have a truly held belief that I can't tolerate rejection. I can't tolerate that failure. They're very aware that they're often viewed as different from their peers, and that lack of experience compounds by, you know, the early 20s, because dating's a skill. So usually what I do is I actually encourage them to go out and fail so they can learn how to tolerate it, learn it's not that big of a deal eventually. Horrible at first, though. But let's go on to video games. I'm not here to convince you that video games are a bad idea. I would be an utter hypocrite. I love video games. I could go into a room of our kids and just shout Minecraft and start a conversation with them. They'll go for hours. But what I want you to understand is that there's different reasons that a lot of our kids play these video games. Part of it does frequently have to do with that sort of perfectionistic anxiety. They don't attempt new things because they're scared of failure, where video games, oh, they can master those quickly. Oh man, can they ever. There's rules, there's a definite framework. I can feel good about completing Dragon Age. For all 100 plus hours, I still haven't finished it. But I can feel good about that. So there's a lot of different reasons that our kids are playing these video games. And I want to talk about how we use board games in a way to help augment those executive functioning deficits and get people away from video games while still capitalizing on that interest in whatever that interest is. I also want to give you guys some recommendations on how to encourage healthy screen time. Now, many of you might be aware that the American Academy of Pediatrics made recommendations starting in 1999 about appropriate screen time usages at various age levels. Now, personally, I think some of those are a little conservative these days, because even the revised versions are largely based on the 1999 data. And parents, I don't know about you, in 1999, I was still getting free CDs from America Online. The technology has changed a bit, okay? So a good benchmark, no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time in any given day. A more recent article by the American Academy of Pediatrics, don't ask me who wrote it, I can't remember, but a more recent study actually pointed out that there was a greater correlation with more than 2 hours of screen time and psychological dysfunction than inactivity, even when they included people who were active and all that screen time. That was the biggest contributor of the two. So no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time in any given day, which is plenty. I'm also going to give you some activities that we use that you might be able to use at home, okay? Some of these you can only use in a group. One of them we just tried. I might talk about that. But there's a couple that you can definitely use at home, okay, with your kids, and they're totally fun. I talked a little bit about this, but video games, for a lot of our kids, it's predictable. There's rules. You can get a walkthrough on the internet if you're playing what's called a role-playing game, if you love stories like that, okay? You can know what the outcome of your answer in a conversation is by reading that walkthrough. You can master things quickly. I don't know if any of you have played Minecraft, but I love to build things in real life, hence I love Minecraft. I can build a house in an hour in Minecraft. Takes a little longer to build something in real life. And so what happens is what we see with the kids we work with, not only on the autism spectrum, but what we call autism adjacent, is that those social skills, those social muscles, start playing video games at 6 years old. Start playing them a lot. Use that as a coping strategy to bring down your anxiety, to find mastery where you're not finding it in real life. Fast forward 8 years, 14 years old, developmentally very different place, but those social muscles that may or may not have been there have atrophied, and now they're behind. So a lot of our kids who really have social anxiety start to look autistic because they haven't had practice. Immediate reinforcement. Again, you know, I can level up playing Dragon Age or Skyrim pretty quickly. I can't level up in dating. I mean, I sort of can. I mean, when I gave her the ring, but you know. But also video games are not ambiguous like social interactions. I mean, the very definition of small talk is talking about conversations that really have no personal relevance. A form of communication called phatic interaction is just using words as a social marker. Hi, how you doing? Fine. I don't care. Okay? I'm just acknowledging their existence, and they're just acknowledging mine. The words mean nothing. That drives some of our kids nuts. I want to briefly mention MMORPGs. Anybody not know what that means? Raise your hand. Yeah, I thought so. MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games. These are a double whammy, okay? These are not just video games where you're playing with potentially millions of other people. World of Warcraft's probably the biggest still. But they're pseudo-social environments. You don't meet face-to-face. You can control your online identity. You can control how you talk to people. You can control when you talk to people. You can pick your screen name to reflect whatever identity you have. You know, I've seen kids that we work with who have had girlfriends that they've been dating for 2.5 years, but they've met one time for 1 week. They met online playing World of Warcraft. It's kind of a trap for some of our kids who are very socially anxious. And video games are fast-paced. Video game developers, I'm friends with some of them, they know exactly how quickly to reinforce you with rewards. If you're playing too long with no reward, you don't want to play their game. They know that. So talked a little bit about this stuff already, but what I can't emphasize enough is when you fast forward far enough, they become overly reliant, at least the kids we work with, overly reliant on this form of social interaction, especially some of the MMOs like World of Warcraft. Minecraft to a limited extent as well, if you've got a shared server in which you're building things. There's actually a study I heard about, and I'm still trying to get my hands on it, where some researchers took away all forms of screens from adolescents for a period of 2 weeks, and they found just a clinically significant level of improvement in the ability to recognize facial expressions after 2 weeks of no screens. Okay, and I believe they were neurotypical kids, but don't quote me, I'm still trying to get my hands on that one. So, it's dense, but a couple of strategies that we have. Please don't over-rely on screens as a babysitter. You know, 8-hour car trips, if anybody still takes those, are one thing, but waiting in line at the bank is a wholly different thing. And we see parents who have 3 or 4 gadgets in their pocket. Kids throwing a tantrum because the Game Boy DS is out of battery. Boom, out busts the iPad mini. Oh, that's not working. Okay, here's some spare batteries I'm carrying. We've seen this. Do allow your kids, monitor what they're playing, okay? The ESRB has a rating system on all video games. Monitor what they're playing. It says M for mature, don't give it to an 11-year-old, all right? Encourage activities that have face-to-face interactions, real face-to-face interactions. Encourage a wide variety of activities. One of the things that when we use open-ended questions and discuss what about these video games is so important to our kids, some like to build. Some like the stories and role-playing games. Some like just the fact that it lowers their anxiety level. Based on their answers, we recommend other activities. For some of the kids that we've worked with, they like to build things. I teach them to cook. They can build things in a culinary sense, and they love it. For some who like stories, we get them doing comedy improv or acting. There's all sorts of things we can do. Another suggestion I have for parents is be a model of the behavior you want to see. You want your kid to work for like an hour from 6 to 7, you pick a hobby, you do it with them. It's probably not going to hurt you to get away from the screen either. Just the reality. And this I can't stress enough, don't put a TV or a computer in their bedroom. Okay, it used to be no TVs, but now I don't even watch TV anymore. I have Hulu and Netflix. Okay, that just gives them access in their bedroom. They sleep worse, aside from all the rest of the stuff we've been talking about. So we use social games, actual face-to-face interactions, also known as board games, because they encourage teamwork. You have to read social cues depending on the game you're playing. It encourages flexibility depending on how you do it. Turn-taking, they're still purpose-driven, so a lot of our kids like that it's not ambiguous, you're there for a reason. And depending on the game, they have to learn small talk and banter. This is important to a lot of games. Like one we tried out yesterday for the first time, which was awesome, where they have to sort of deduce who's the spy amongst the group. That one got hilarious. Flux and we didn't play test this at all. They're both card games that have changing rules all the time. We didn't play test this at all is by far the most popular in at least one, maybe 2 or 3 of our groups. It's fast. I've never seen a game go longer than 10 minutes, so we can often play 3, 4 games very quickly. It reinforces reading skills, patience, attention, and it reduces impulsivity. It's really funny. And they love that. Even when they lose, they laugh. There's a lot of expansions you can get depending on how much the kids you're working with can process information. And like I said, it's just hugely popular. These are 2 of the cards from that game. And the first one, the you card, where if any player says you, your, or yours, they immediately lose. So suddenly our kids are now not only having to self-monitor, they have to pay attention to what's going on with the game in terms of the cards. They have to increase their receptive language abilities by listening to others at the same time. And it's hilarious when they lose. And watching them come up with interesting new ways of getting around pronouns is awesome. Cake or death is great because there's like 3 of them and they all have a different result. Watching kids say, well, okay, vote, cake or death. Well, what am I voting for? I don't know. And for them to relax into that it's okay to sometimes be a little ambiguous. These ones are great because especially with our more impulsive kids, they don't get beyond the you win card and they just slam it down and I win, you all lose. But they don't read the rest of the card. You have to read the rest of the card. That first one's tough because we don't have any girls in our group, in at least most of our groups. And they learn really quickly to actually read the cards with a little bit of, peer pressure can be a good thing sometimes. But let's talk about RPGs, pen and paper role-playing games. Have any of you, raise your hand if you have played Dungeons and Dragons? Awesome, my people. So pen and paper role-playing games are great because you actually have to play the roles, okay? You have to get together and essentially tell a story. The dungeon master or game master tells a story to the group, and based on the personality and skills of their character, they have to decide how to interact with that story. We're playing pretend in a really organized way. They love the framework of the game, and it's really great, and we can encourage with some flexibility different skills, okay? If you've got a particularly sadistic dungeon master, I can change the game up on them like that, okay? For some of our higher function guys who just need to work on flexibility. You only need a rule book, you need some paper, you need some dice, basically, and your imagination. Miniatures are optional and all that, but Dungeons and Dragons is by far the most popular. Aeroflight is an independent one developed locally that's actually pretty cool for encouraging personality and role-playing. GURPS, the generic universal role-playing system, is an oldie but a goodie if you like to get away from the fantasy, knights in shining armor stuff. Some of the advantages, they're flexible, but they've got a framework. They have to develop a perspective on what other people would do. Because in Dungeons and Dragons, there's a moral alignment, and the kids I work with, they can only be pro-social moral alignments, okay? They can be, let's say, lawful neutral, which is your typical judge / Captain Picard type. follow the letter of the law regardless of whether it's good or evil. Then you've got your chaotic good. They don't care about the rules of society, they just want to do good. Robin Hood. Then you've got your lawful good type Superman. I care about society and doing good. So they have to pick one of those, or neutral good, but that's boring. But they also have to develop a specific personality for their character, and they get in-game rewards if they can successfully do this, and they chomp at the bit to get those in-game rewards. A magic item that helps their character, their character levels up. What we've started doing in the last couple weeks is specifically looking for behaviors like being ready to take your turn, not interrupting, raising your hand to speak, and collectively the whole group will get rewards depending on how people are doing that, and we tally it. We've got the group I work with, I'm a doctor level practitioner, we've got the co-facilitators at the master's level, so you got 2 clinicians doing this, and so we know what to look for. And actual face-to-face socializing, taking turns, reading people's expressions, coming up with what someone else would say. If that's not developing empathy, I don't know what is. So I want you guys, for those of you who haven't played, I want to give you a taste of what it is, okay? So we've got a rogue, a thief, but they're from a noble background, all right? They're chaotic good. They're the Robin Hood type. They want to do good for people, and society, well, they can take a flying leap. Their rules. But they have a personality that they flatter people, and those people feel wonderful. Incidentally, they also don't like to get dirty and won't be caught dead in unsuitable accommodations. Pretty problematic given they're a thief and probably homeless. So we've got tension there, and some of our guys have to work that out. They're responsible. They have a duty to the common people. They're also bonded to their family heirloom, which happens to be a bow. But they have a flaw that they can't resist the allure of gold because it can help them get their family's legacy back. So just, shout out what you guys think. What do you think this person would be like if you were that person? Like, how would they act? You think they'd be really cool and mellow? Do you think they might be a little arrogant? Yeah? Do you think they might act a little better than other people? Do you think they're going to be the first to fight? No. And those are the questions we ask our kids who are playing. And we're going to reward them for actually role-playing that character well. Just to give you an example of how powerful this can be, we have seen kids who, in person-to-person interactions without the framework of a game, how are you doing? Good. You haven't do any fun this week? I don't know. But some of those kids become our diplomats when we play this game. They can come up with the most amazing ideas. They're the smooth talkers, okay? It's incredible to watch, and then the challenge just becomes generalizing that into day-to-day activities. So I want you guys to think about this. The local king, King Bob, assigns that same rogue and the party members to investigate a local tavern which has been rumored to be a hideout for the local enclave of the Dwarven Mafia. The tavern is a rich area, we recently did this by the way, rich area of the township, and the party has been instructed to be discreet and not cause any violence in the city. Let's pretend it's Medina. Upon entering the tavern, one of the party members, a half-orc fighter with a penchant for debauchery, is distracted by a mysterious-looking jug at the bar which reads scumbled, apples mostly, and begins to argue with the barkeep that he really wants to try it, despite the warnings of the other patrons. Now you, the noble rogue, notices that the majority of the tavern is distracted by the spectacle of a half-orc about to imbibe a substance that cannot be allowed near metal. Amidst the chaos, you notice that there's a pair of well-armored dwarves standing silent and attentive, each to one side of the roped-off area marked VIP, no entry. What do you do? What does your character do? No, I'm serious. I'm asking this. What do you guys think? Shout something out. I don't care.
Move the half-orc close to the guards, and when there's the reaction with the metal, you let in the no entry.
So you try and get the half-orc to drink near the guards and distract them. Okay, so guess what? I'm going to ask you to roll for your diplomacy, and you may or may not make it. That's just how the game works, and you can play that at home. It's a great family game. I mean, truly, truly. It's fun to watch families play that. So here's part of the reasons we do this, okay? I'm a clinician. I got to anchor everything in something clinical. So this encourages reality testing in often inflexible people, okay, who are very sure of others' motivations but have a hard time actually attributing affective language to themselves or others. So the simple question, what are other possibilities for either what your character would do or why they reacted how they did? And we brainstorm that quickly. What would you as a person think in that situation, and might your character not think that as well? You know, what clues in behavior, what you do or see, are you noticing in the other person's behavior? And we work on that. And that's generalizable into day-to-day life. Again, I'll mention that there's in-game reinforcement, magic items, more experience points, leveling up. But again, we often come up against that perfectionistic black and white thinking. And this setting is a safe, well-framed opportunity for them to try out different social strategies. Again, I'm not letting anybody be evil. I penalize them for evil actions. They need to make in-character decisions, and they get rewarded for that. We've seen a lot of progress with some of our guys just doing that. So I'm going to move things on to Ben for homework, and we're going to take questions afterwards.
So yeah, it should be clear that the D&D group is one of our most popular groups. And my mom runs a methadone clinic in Denver, and so that's harm reduction for drug addiction. I really believe D&D is harm reduction for computer addiction. What's interesting is it kind of taps into the same type of thinking process that works really well for computer games, but they're in the room with other people. And one of my hopes is that we can use some of the card shops in Seattle. We're really blessed by that. We do run a Saturday evening game night at Card Kingdom in Ballard. I'd like to really expand that. I think those are allies in a way for us to create more community. The folks I work with aren't going to hang out at the mall really, and I think that's to their benefit. I think that's awesome. And so we'd like to see that expand more and more, because whether it's Magic the Gathering or D&D or some of these other things. We've also done something a little unique. Johnny Spangler is one of our facilitators, and he has created a Minecraft server. So we have an Aspiring Youth Minecraft server. What we're trying to emphasize with that is quality over quantity. So just to go off of what Raphael's been talking about, so it's 5 p.m. on Sundays, and they're going to be communicating with other people who are Aspiring Youth group members. So it kind of creates a local community. Johnny's also done something really interesting. You can go on our webpage on Aspiring Youth, and we have a YouTube channel. He's done something called Let's Play. So the person who's famous, if your child's ever told you Stampy, he's like this famous guy who kind of plays the game and then narrates while he's playing it. Well, Johnny's done that, but with themes like procrastination or anger or miscommunication or what if she likes me, to go back to the dating theme there. So just trying to use media and technology in a way that we can kind of drive forward some of these skills, and in the same way that Raphael and Adam and Donato have used it to do that. So we've done D&D groups for about 6 or 7 years now.
How do you find those YouTube videos?
So it's just aspiringyouth.net. That's our homepage, and there's a YouTube link there. Yep, and it's Johnny Spangler, but his YouTube name is Johnny Knowing, and it's been pretty cool. I use it sometimes in my groups. If we're hitting a rough spot, we'll watch a 7-minute clip. I think our next step is to kind of really create curriculum around that. But, yeah. So in the theme of technology, I like this slide. I'm going to go through homework fairly quickly, and I want to apply it to sort of any sort of tasks and kind of how we approach. The thing of it is that, you know, we're sort of told if you really focus in on something you're good at, you can do great. And that's pretty neat comment. A lot of our folks are great at hyperfocus. The reality is, whether it's high school homework, whether it's college homework, even in a work setting, I think about the main projects I work on, I do great at them, but then when I have to do some of the other administrative duties, I have a hard time multitasking or switching, okay? And we'd like to believe that if you can just focus in on homework, you'll be fine. That's not always the case. I mean, homework, whether on the high school or college level or even in work settings, it's good to be able to multitask. And sometimes our folks have difficulty switching. I could go back to the slide on the diagnosis of ASD1, difficulty switching, okay, and planning and prioritizing. So kind of included this slide, utterly obsessed or not interested. And so the term that's been coined by Michelle Garcia-Winter is something, comfort with discomfort, meaning doing an assignment even if you don't like it very much, doing something, getting it out of the way. And the two classes I had the hardest time in college with were the two science requirements I had. And I went to a liberal arts college. There wasn't much requirements, but those two classes, even though they were really geared towards people who are non-science majors, really stuck. I would have loved to just take all history classes. That was my major. So very quickly, I want to leave time for a conversation and questions. But so you can imagine, there's 6 areas of executive functioning. If it's impulse control, and perhaps it's helpful for you to think of your child. What's the area where they're strong? They have really good impulse control. They're able to tune out a lot of distractions. But emotional control is hard. Okay, but honing in on these 6 areas can be helpful. Okay, impulse control. We haven't spoken on this much, but the device that they're doing homework on is also the device that they're gaming on. So when Raffael talks about 2 hours of recreational screen time, well, it's really hard if that's the 2 hours is getting interspersed with homework and things like that. And if your child's ever, for Seattle Public Schools parents, your child's like, I'm just checking my grades on the source. Well, they're actually on Minecraft, and that's why a lot of parents call it the curse instead of the source. It can be distracting, the fact that the device is the same thing to do homework as it is to recreate, okay? When I was in high school, I did pen and paper on the homework, and I walked upstairs and I watched Seinfeld or The Simpsons or whatever. It was different devices. And I tell my clients point blank, I don't know how I would have done in high school if where I relaxed digitally was also where I was expected to do homework. And we have schools, of course, where they have tablets in the school. So then we're expecting our students throughout the course of the day to be using their tablets to do homework, but then a lot of our kids like hacking, and it can become also a source of status to prove that you can hack the school laptop system and things like that. So it becomes tricky around the impulse control if you're sort of having to separate and self-control that. Around emotional control, I touch on this because, first of all, seeking input from a teacher, going up and saying, I don't understand this assignment, very anxiety-provoking. Okay. Similarly, around stress. And so, I was the one who was, oh, Mom, I got to go get a snack. Back to the homework table. Oh, I got to go check this. Oh, I think this is like the one time I would want to do laundry as a high schooler, I think. Oh, Mom, I got to change my clothes in the laundry. Like that, so handling stress can be challenging around this. And again, homework can be very anxiety-provoking. And this is an area, if it's around impulse control, perhaps an educational support. If you feel that your child has challenges are around emotional control, that you see them, it's not just any assignment, but the big assignments that create more stress, probably a therapist is the direction that you want to go. So we can all think to kind of big assignments where it feels big and overwhelming. But I think that's especially the case for a lot of clients I work with, breaking down into small tasks. So that planning and prioritizing aspect of executive functioning. Similarly, a lot of my clients are not great at understanding the nuance between different assignments. They'll put the same mental energy and effort into the Spanish worksheet that's worth 1/100th of their grade as they will into the history assignment that's worth 1/3 of their grade. Their peers are kind of picking up how to sort of play the game, cruise through that Spanish assignment really quick so you can spend a lot more time on the history assignment that's going to be worth a lot more. So for my clients, that kind of prioritizing part can be challenging. Or they might be working on something that's due further in advance, even though they've got something due that's very important tomorrow. So, around flexibility, that's adjusting to new expectations. We can also sort of say perhaps they're developing an idea or a concept and they need to switch on it. That can be challenging. Switching between tasks. Working memory, of course, that, and I was talking to an occupational therapist recently, and I was hoping to get the paper for this talk, but what she reported to me is that these 6 areas of executive functioning for folks on the spectrum, working memory seems to be the one that's developing slowest in relation to neurotypical peers. And working memory matters. A lot of our folks are really good at detailed memory, so can remember a lot of facts, but without a lot of context, and also how to apply that. So they can remember a lot of things that can be very hyper-focused in their area, but applying that to a paper or taking a reading assignment and transforming that into a responsive essay can be challenging, and that's requiring working memory. Remembering parts about the paper, the reading, or what the professor or teacher has said, and translating that into work production can be hard. And again, the last area of executive functioning, self-evaluation. So accepting feedback, being able to accept that. So just that kind of a cute cartoon. Very quick, we're going to leave about 25 minutes for conversation and questions. So one of the things that can be helpful, perhaps, there is obviously a lot of pressure. I won't even say the word Common Core, but there is a lot of pressure around homework and work production. In working with a lot of young adults, what we've seen is that comfort with discomfort, that sort of that skill of doing something, even if it's not my favorite thing to do, but like the process of it, and maybe not worrying about production as much, that can be challenging because they're getting assessment, they're getting feedback, and a lot of it can be, I want to help my child get a good grade that feels competitive academically. I want them to be successful, and I certainly don't want to take away from that in any way. I don't have an adolescent, but when my daughter is an adolescent, I'm sure I'm going to accidentally put those pressures on her. Okay, I think there's a lot of pressure on this, and when there's a lot of pressure on production, we're maybe not able to step back as providers, as parents, and sort of say, let's focus a little less on the grade and let's focus on the skills that can be built. Because if the young person can develop healthy ways to approach homework, ways to kind of plan and prioritize, ways to get through assignments that they don't necessarily like, that can build a lot of skill for later on. It can be very valuable. Another strategy I think is important is like establishing structure for study times. Alluding to what Raffael was talking about, like having a set time for screen time. That's not just 2 hours after school, but maybe saying 5 to 7 is homework time, then dinner is 7 to 8, screen time is 8 to 10. Something along those lines that adds a bit more structure and predictability can be helpful. Obviously, given your child's age, that's going to vary how much structure you can put on it. Okay? If they're a high school senior, it's a little harder to kind of sit there with the stopwatch and gauge that. But if your child needs some structure to study, that can be really helpful. We've seen that when we change environment and setting, it can be really helpful. You pay taxes, you have public libraries. Sometimes being at a public library where the gaming isn't right there, or the snacks over by the fridge, or the younger sibling, or all of those things, we can kind of help that young person focus in, and they can sort of say, this is my study time. For a lot of high schoolers I've worked with, I almost see a tutor not so much as giving the subject matter. I've literally had some of my high schoolers know more about math than their tutor did, but the fact that that tutor was assigned to them for that given hour and they were expected to work on math during that time, it added some healthy structure. I do think for some of my clients, after school study hall time can be a little problematic because loud noises, other kids aren't taking it seriously, etc. So that's why I would lean towards public library versus a study time at a high school cafeteria where some of the kids there might be being louder, okay, more loud. Avoiding the big kind of back and forth in the conversation. It's easier for a young person to say, I don't want to do homework, than I can't. And if you get sucked into the conversation, if you find yourself explaining to your child why homework's important, and they've shifted the emphasis from the homework to you. All of a sudden it's, mom's on my case, blah, blah, et cetera. And differing degrees. I've seen some of my clients push for that a little more and be a little more skilled at pushing the parent's button. I don't know if that's more skilled, less skilled.
Skilled.
It's not fun, skilled, to their detriment. Because if the conversation becomes really big and long about why to do homework, the focus has shifted, unfortunately. And pursuing teachers to verify assignments, I think that we have to acknowledge for some of our young folks, seeking feedback is just going to be something that develops later. And we need to remember that some of the folks we work with don't have the peer cohort to check about assignments. In high school, I was lucky enough to have other people in my classes where if I wasn't sure about an assignment or like, oh, what did we have to do? Or did the teacher tell us we had to write this paper? I could talk to them and bounce ideas. And I'm up to and including, sharing answers. I don't think I cheated in high school, but probably looked at other people's worksheets or things like that. Okay, I don't know. My high school teacher's like listening right now. No, but you can get support from peers. And we have to acknowledge that some of these folks don't have that close peer cohort that they can ask. And so I think it's valid to talk to teachers about it. And there's some really awesome resource room teachers at the high school level who can be a really important ally. And one of the teachers I know at Roosevelt, she like takes phone pictures of the assignments and like emails it to the parent so they can verify, and so that if the child comes home and says, no, I don't have any homework, they're checking that. So if we could have more teachers doing that, I think it'd make it a little easier. And then, around kind of larger, I mentioned planning and prioritizing, breaking large assignments into smaller ones. So these are some of the books that we're recommending around this. We'd like to add Dr. Nerdlove.
Oh, great website.
Okay.
Great website.
So a very specific on dating and everything. And then this one, the Executive Functioning 101. So involving your child in that conversation about those 6 areas of executive function and kind of understanding themselves a little better, that illustrated online tool is really helpful. In the blog we did prior to this, so if you go on the Autism blog, we have a link to it right there. I think it's understood.org, and it was put out by the National Center for Learning Disabilities. So a few more. Dr. McCurry is local and really wonderful therapist, and that's around parenting the anxious child. So a lot of good resources. So we thank you, and I see David with some microphones for you, and we have off-site people. Hello. You might have some questions as well. Thanks. Questions? Dating, homework, technology. I think we had a question here.
Yeah. Since a lot of kids are really doing homework online and looking at videos on YouTube and playing video games, are you saying that the 2 hours covers all of that?
No, specifically that's recreational screen time, okay? One of the most insidious things about when we're dealing with screen addiction, which I actually do in my private practice, is the fact that much like having an eating disorder, at this point in history, you really can't go without using screens and function in a day-to-day way. You need an email address to get most things these days. You pay bills online. So no, that is specifically 2 hours of recreational screen time. And one thing I should note is there are some great programs out there, they're easy to find, that parents can control for a computer what sites are viewed at what time. So you can eliminate YouTube, you can eliminate Facebook, you can eliminate various programs like Minecraft, and only allow things like Microsoft Office or OpenOffice or whatever your kid's supposed to be using for work.
I have 2 questions. You mentioned the gender disparity in diagnosis. Is there anything being done to address gender disparity in in therapeutic settings or non-clinical settings like the social groups? And my other question is, do you have any tips for helping a young person who really doesn't endorse the diagnosis, pretty much actively rejects it?
I can go on that one.
So you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, I'll definitely answer that one. You know, one of the philosophies I mentioned to people in my private practice is regardless of a diagnosis, a problem is a problem is a problem. I could take that label away, and if they've got problems socializing, with or without that label, that problem is still there, okay? And that's, you either have that problem or you don't. In terms of one of the older groups I work with at the Alyssa Burnett Center, we actually do have some girls in our class, and for our higher functioning folks, it's actually really nice because they get a multitude of perspectives to hear. That's not going to work for every group, and I know I'll let Ben talk about some of the other groups we have set up.
Yes. So, and around identity, I think it doesn't have to be the label. And when parents come to our enrollment meetings, sometimes they'll sort of specifically say, I haven't talked to my kid about the diagnosis yet. I think that's really valid because, you know, the kid shouldn't be going around sort of saying, this is my diagnosis necessarily. I don't think they have to embrace it. You know, the actively rejecting it part, that's a teenage thing to do, right? And I think one of the nice things that there's better cultural representations of folks on the spectrum now, and like geeky's pretty cool. So I don't know whether diagnosis or not, if your child happens to like some quirky interests like comic books or Japanese anime, some of the things that kind of are associated with that, it's really cool to go to one of these conventions and kind of like be around a lot of folks, some who might know identify closely with the diagnosis, some who might not. I think Raphael's comment was helpful on, well, whether you care about this diagnosis or not, whether you want to use this label or not. That's what I like about executive function is like everyone is working on that, and it allows the person a more specific way to focus on that rather than saying, I have a diagnosis or I don't. It also gets away from that thing of, if I don't have the diagnosis, everything's fine, okay? And then on gender, what we do, first of all, on the diagnosis, I think a lot of times, I can't speak to the actual diagnosis, but the referrals to groups. Boys are more likely to get referred because the behavior is a little more obvious. And I think Raphael alluded to this, is just because a person communicates well, and I think some of my colleagues would venture to say that a girl's able to kind of cover it better and mask it, and it's not going to disrupt a classroom. We're not going to do that. So I think that it's a little bit of a bummer that, oh yeah, they do fine in school, they don't disrupt class. All of a sudden that means they don't need outside resources, okay? So I try to emphasize that social skills is for shy folks as well. It doesn't have to just be for folks, kids who, the classic sort of loud boy who's very, you know, or the playground police. We get a lot of 4th and 5th grade referrals where it's, you know, he likes everyone to play the playground games his way and stuff like that. But I think some of the social things that girls have going on are just as important to address. One thing that we do in our program, in the after-school groups, we do girls rule. So we have specific girls-only groups. And part of the reason is that 5th grade girls on the spectrum are working on different things than 5th grade boys on the spectrum. It's also because when we were running groups and we had 10 boys and 2 girls, that wasn't really fair to the 2 girls. And similarly, I think a lot of the girls we work with in their resource room, they have that same kind of ratio. And so it's really helpful. They might not have another girl in their resource room. So we love it in our girls rules group when we kind of got them all together. An interesting thing, and I don't know if this is just our program or this area or whatever, but our ratio gets a lot better on the high school level. So in our summer camp, we're about 60-40. I could go back to that picture of all of them at Gold Creek and we count the girls and count the boys, but we're about 60-40, 70-30. And perhaps that's, you know, just anecdotal. We were working on some more groups for young adults, and there was a provider who suggested, it was like, he thought we should do like ladies' night or something like that. He thought the young adult groups would go a lot better if we just let in girls for free. And so I think people are wrestling with it. I think there's some validity to that. But apparently at the Melissa Burnett Center, when they've talked about doing more social things, one of the biggest things that folks are talking about is that, that this is a place to be social, and it'd be nicer if there's a more equal ratio, boys and girls. So I hope that's kind of something I've got a daughter, I feel passionately about all this. So.
And one thing I will actually say that Ben mentioned about some of the conventions, if any of you have heard of Penny Arcade Expo, PAX, it is one of the largest video game conventions in the world. It started here in Seattle. It has remained here in Seattle. And as of either last year or the year before, it was the first time a nonprofit mental health organization called Take This came in to help with some of the mental health stuff that goes on there. I was actually one of the people working in there. And there were a lot more diverse problems than we might expect, and it was an incredibly utilized feature. A lot of panic in an overstimulating environment like that with a lot of social ambiguity and weirdness going on. So that's expanding, as is the awareness of sort of mental health issues within the gamer community.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I'm in the schools, and in the dating segment, you pointed out that it's harder to date when you're worried about your schoolwork. Did I get that right?
Well, not just schoolwork, but just the sensory issues. I mean, we were sort of saying in the cafeteria, that's a great way to meet people. But if you have a sensory processing disorder, the cafeteria is not going to be a great place to meet another person or strike up conversation. Similarly, I don't know if you've seen this or if it's occurring at your school, but like at the end of the day when there might be clubs or groups going on, or even people just lingering at the end of the day, I think a lot of my folks are getting on the quickest bus home. And I would extrapolate that also to the community college setting where we're saying, gosh, stick around and do the video game club or the international club or anime club, kind of take advantage of the community college or the college social part. For some of my folks, if they're going to college, they are going to college. They're going to show up for class, and they're going to leave when it's done. So I think just sort of that part of not picking out the other sort of informal social aspects of school. It's not necessarily that they're like, I don't want to date or I don't want to socialize because I'm focused on homework. It's more that some of the in-between time, whether in the hallways, a lot of my guys in the hallways have their head down and then going straight to the next class, right? Their peers might be lingering a little, striking up that small talk. And as Raphael alluded to, that's very non-logical small talk. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But their peers are taking advantage of that little banter in between. So I didn't mean to say it was just about homework, but more just about that the school day can be overwhelming to my folks. I think one parent put it well. She said, it's kind of like he's going through the day with ankle weights on. Like he's doing the same school day as his peers, but he's having to work a lot harder. And that's going to make it harder to strike up those small informal conversations in between classes, at the beginning of the school day, at the end of the school day. This is really weird. I don't like mornings, but going back to high school, I would get up a little early and get there a little early to chit-chat and flirt and socialize and stuff like that. And, that was me taking advantage of that social opportunity. I wouldn't do it now.
I got it that there are 6 points in executive functioning, and on the spectrum, it's harder, therefore, to do schoolwork.
Do you mind if
And therefore, I felt here's another reason for teachers to be guilty because we're ruining the dating life of our students because we're asking too much of them.
No, I don't think it's workload at all. I just think it's these are large schools, and can be loud. And if there's any way to, and a lot of schools are doing sort of lunch buddy groups or kind of places that a lot of students take their lunch in the counseling office and things like that. So I think there's accommodations that are happening. No, I'm just naming that the actual process of being in school, being in loud hallways, whereas their peers are loving and embracing the loud hallways and using it for banter and to build social connections. My peers, that that can be overwhelming. The kids I work with, a lot of times that can be overwhelming. Now, I definitely think, homework, they're there for a reason, so, yeah.
You mind if I jump in and throw something?
Well, I think it.
So one of the analogies I've actually used with teachers is it's RAM. It's just simply RAM. Okay, executive functioning is the how much memory, how much processing anybody can do in a given time. And for a lot of our folks on the autism spectrum, the stuff that is more habitual and intuitive to those people not on the spectrum is stuff they have to consciously think about, like what's the appropriate response to this greeting? How far away should I stand? And if they're using 90% of their memory, their memory to do that, they've only got 10% left for the other things like dating. And it's not a question of the teachers, it's not a question of anything, it's just anything that anybody else has, it's just a question of how much RAM do they have? And if 90% of it's occupied, they don't have much left.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing is, what can I bring to my families that will make their life easier?
Is that all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Well, again, I've seen a lot of the parents that National Center for Learning Disabilities, that handbook, I think is a really neat way. And again, it has something that they can look at together, both parent and child, and it's got images and pictures to it, and kind of a way to, back to your point of sort of getting away from, it's not the diagnosis that creates these challenges, it's the executive functioning that kind of occurs along with that. Mm-hmm. And those 6 areas are a way to break it down, because I think if we can give them more specific areas to target, rather than because of your autism, we don't want to say because of your autism homework's going to be hard or dating's going to be hard. It might be that working memory is hard for you. Therefore, remembering something about a prospective partner, that he likes animals or she is really into this TV series, the kind of working memory that, let's say, helps for dating or helps for homework, that might be harder. And again, those 6 areas, I think it's nice because it gives the parents a chance to sort of say, you know what, my kid's really good on emotional control. He's an even keel guy, but the impulse control is harder for him, and kind of a more specific way to dive in and tackle that.
And on top of that, thankfully Ben jumped in and gave me a second to think about my answer. One of the best things you can give the parents is hope. That there are programs that work. Aspiring Youth, we've seen some great stuff. We've seen some great stuff at the Alyssa Burnett Center. So there are programs that work. And that's a great thing in and of itself. But another thing that I see with a lot of our folks is this underlying assumption that normal has a value and normal is good. Okay? What I explain to them is that normal is just a statistical term. Okay? All it means is people fall within a certain range, but it's not necessarily good. Einstein wasn't normal. I think he was an okay dude.
Yeah.
And our kids, and basically teaching them that just because they're different in certain respects, that's not necessarily bad. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of that identity formation, that reappropriation of that ASPE term comes from. And I say ASPE with a capital A.
Loud and proud.
Yeah, basically. And so for a lot of our kids, those are the 2 biggest things. Hope, and that normal is not good or bad. It's just a thing.
Right. Mm-hmm. And to go off of that, just I think also we are lucky in this area. The community colleges are really stepping up. There's some great programs out there. And when we were working with young adults, started about 7 or 8 years ago, people didn't even, it was like, like there's people over 18 on the spectrum. There was a big focus on younger kid intervention and things like that, but like the Alyssa Burnett Center, with a lot of the community colleges having really neat programs in place. And I think what it is that college level folks, post-secondary folks have sort of said, wow, these students have a lot to offer and they're going to really engage well. We need to kind of reorient around that a little. One of the things we'll be doing later this spring is we do a panel of aspiring youth graduates, sort of who are in community college, and that's really neat for the high schoolers. Obviously, the high schoolers will listen a lot more closely to a 21-year-old or 22-year-old than they'll listen to me. So that panel comes up, and so that's, I think, when he talks about hope, I think also knowing that there's some pretty good post-secondary options out there, whether Bellevue College,
great one.
The Seattle Central has a new program. We've seen a lot of students have success at Cascadia and Shoney. So that's really neat, and I think part of that is in Washington State there's a pretty big emphasis on community colleges as supports, and even UW and SU, the 4 years.
Well, and there's even a growing awareness in professional settings. I know that my fiance is a developer at Microsoft, and there is an awareness of a larger than normal occurrence rate of folks on the spectrum within, the computer and technology world. So there's some supports even there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hey. Hello?
This will probably be our last question. Right?
This is Crystal in Kennewick, and I have a question about executive functioning. My son has problems with his emotional control. Like when he's not in first place in a game, he gets really mad, and he also has memory issues because he forgets to turn in his homework and bring home assignments. And those are two things that he really struggles with. You talked a lot about executive functioning tonight, but I was wondering if there are some things that we can build into our day, our daily life, to improve those areas.
There's actually a really good book that is written for parents in a similar situation as yourself. It's called Navigating the Social World. I use it frequently. It's got a lot of great worksheets, and it does an amazing job of breaking exactly stuff like that down into manageable steps of how to implement that into your life, starting with the most simple tasks of maybe writing things down, or noticing the signs of stressors that are causing that emotional outburst. It does a great job of building that up from the very, very basics, and it's written in very clear language that anybody can understand. It's a wonderful resource.
Would we be able to add some of those resources, like follow-up email? We had that other website as well. Yeah, we can follow up. So we would put that on the blog post and kind of add some more resources. We've got a few on the reference section, but always good to have a few more in there.
Okay, thank you.
Including Dr. Nerdlove.
Including Dr. Nerdlove.
Okay, good. Well, folks, thanks. It's 8:30. I think we're...
All right.
Okay, thanks. You, folks.
Thanks.
And we'll be around if